Hello and greetings there, everybody here at Pear Fair. I'm excited to bring you this session today. My name is Carl Hooker. Those of you that don't know me, I've spent 22 years in education. I worked as a school teacher, as an administrator, technology integration specialist, a little bit of everything. I now have multiple podcasts that I'm a host of. I work for Future Ready Schools, and I'm excited to be a part of this event today. Today's session is about assessing students remotely. And so we'll be looking at all the different strategies when it comes to assessing your students, whether you be in an in-person, hybrid, or remote environment. Check it out.
Let's get into these strategies for assessing your students remotely. Before we get really too far deep into it, again, a little bit about myself. I've been an educator for 22 years. As I mentioned, a former teacher administrator, and now I'm an educational consultant for many districts across the country. Also a Future Ready Schools National Advisor, as I mentioned. I also wrote 6 books, believe it or not, about something called mobile learning. I imagine that. And then I've just launched an online course, the Remote Learning Coach, which I'll show you a little bit more about. But actually this session today gives you some little snippets of what that course is about, because I do go into assessment in that course as well. Also on the side, I am a podcast host, a trivia night, MC, DJ, lots of other things. And so if you've seen me around the internet, follow me at Mr. Hooker. You can see it there at the bottom of the slides. Thank you for connecting. And I'm excited today to be a part of Pear Fair. So let's get into this, guys. Let's talk about assessment first of all. So let's define a few terms before we get into the tools, because I think we're quick to jump in. It's like, how are some ways that I can assess my students? When in reality, we should be really thinking about what's most important about assessment. And so you can see here by the definition on Merriam-Webster that it's the action or instance of making a judgment about something. So think about that. That you make assessments all the time. You make an assessment of your students when you're walking around the classroom, back in the traditional classroom sense, when you see, all right, let's assess how our kids are doing. You can kind of get a gauge on them. When you're driving in your car, you're making assessments regularly. Can I take a left? Should I take a right? Does my car fit into that spot? Those are assessments that we're making all the time. So assessment is a lot more than just that bubble and paper sheet that you have at the end of the year. Now, there are 3 main assessment types, and we'll use these to kind of guide our conversations today. The first one is assessment of learning. The second one is assessment for learning. And the third one, assessment as learning. Now, I'll start out by saying that there's no right or wrong with any of these types, and all of these have a particular place in the everyday classroom, whether it be remote, in person, or hybrid. But it'd be good to define these. And as we look at the tools, you'll see that some lend themselves to different versions of these types of assessments. So in assessment of learning, the student isn't directly involved in the process. In other words, they're only involved in the sense that they're taking an assessment. They have nothing to do with the creation of the assessment, the follow-up, the feedback, any of that. It's just, here's a test. I want you to see how you're doing. I'm checking on your skills and knowledge, and that's it. Move along. When assessment for learning, the student's a little bit more involved in it. In other words, they're maybe helping create some of their own self-assessments in that sense. And when you get to assessment as learning, they're not only creating them, but they're actually actively monitoring themselves to check kind of like, how am I doing? So it's not just a one-off, I'm going to make an assessment and get some feedback. No, it's like, I'm going to check on myself to see how am I doing, and then maybe have some peer feedback as well. Now, with assessment of learning, we're really thinking final product here, right? We're looking at the final product. Okay, you finished your product. We're going to judge it based on this score and see how you did, whether it be a rubric or whether it be an end of course exam, versus assessment for and as learning, where it's a little bit more of a continuous process. And we looked at assessment types. There's also the demonstrating the achievement of learning, which is really what happens when you talk about assessment of learning. It's saying like, did you understand the concept? What do you know? What kind of facts can you retain? What kind of math skills can you demonstrate? Those kind of things. Versus assessment for learning, where it's a little bit more about the feedback process and the feedback loop. So you take an assessment, or not a traditional assessment. Maybe you're doing a writing project, and then you get some feedback from your peers or from a teacher, and then you go again with the second draft. Again, that's part of that continual assessment process. And then assessment as learning, of course, you feel more empowered based on your own learning skills. So you're able to kind of target and match some of the things that you're doing. You're able to think out loud the process. You're able to reflect on some of the things that you're doing. So with all 3 of these areas, again, we're going to hit all 3 of these in different ways, but I wanted to lay out these definitions first before we really get into it. And we'll revisit this slide again in a little bit. Some other things we need to define is this idea of what is Googleable versus non-Googleable. So there's lots of different examples of Googleable tests. I mean, if I were to ask you to think right now as I'm asking you this question, I want you to ponder, what are some examples of Googleable tests, things that you could just Google search? So think about that for a second. And you're probably thinking, Well, things that I can easily find the answers to, right? So multiple choice, quick fact-based assessment, those are the ones that are easily Googleable, meaning if I gave that quiz and a kid had another tab open, they were able to search quickly and figure out the answers to it. That's a Googleable test or Googleable question or answer. Now, non-Googleable, think about that for a second. Yeah, non-Googleable is a little bit different. There, you're really thinking about process. It's about thoughts. It's like about opinions. Like, what do you feel? What do you understand about this moment in history? Or what is it that the author was trying to come across was? What was the theme of this content? So those are things where you're more about opinion, and it's harder to actually cheat on those because they're more about your actual thinking and your own inference and process. So again, another example of some things we need to think about when we're talking about assessment. And again, there are assessments that are Googleable, and that's fine, but there are some that you need to be thinking about. It's like, how do we create non-Googleable ones as well? By the way, that's a mouthful. Now let's talk about two other things, synchronous versus asynchronous. And this, by the way, happens in the classroom too, but these terms have now become kind of front and center because of remote learning. So we think about synchronous learning, which is when everybody is all the students are meeting at an exact time, which means when you're giving a synchronous assessment, all my students are going to take the exact same quiz at the exact same time of the day, versus an asynchronous meeting, which is when kids are meeting or doing work on their own time. So if you're doing asynchronous assessment, that's like, I'm going to give you this longer project. You have so many days to complete it. And some students, of course, like the kid in red there, will finish it right away. And some kids will take a little bit longer, and some kids will wait until the last second, like the blue student there at the bottom, that'll take a little bit more time to get it done. But again, there's a time frame, there's some flexibility and schedule there when it comes to asynchronous. One other definition we need to think about is formative versus summative when it comes to assessments. So formative assessments, what are the differences? There's a lot of different ideas around this. One of the better or not so great analogies, I guess, would be that a formative is when you go to the doctor and they prescribe something, right? So you look at the doctor's like, well, you can lose a little bit of weight, or here's a little pill that'll help you kind of feel better, or here's some vitamins you need to be taking. That's kind of a prescriptive. That's the same thing you do with formative assessment. So you're like looking at a student's, how they did on their formative assessment. You're like, well, you're doing pretty good, but you could stand to do a little bit better in your multiplication facts, or maybe you could, check on your capitalization a little bit better there. And so that's prescriptive. It's a feedback loop. Summative, on the other hand, is more like an autopsy, to be a little graphic, in that, it's really the end of the unit. It's the end of the year. It's those end of course exams, AP finals, those things where you really, you get the score and the student gets their score, but there's no any growth happening off of it. It's more of this is how you did, this is how you demonstrated mastery of the understanding of whatever the concept was. But again, there's not really growth or feedback coming off of that. That's the big difference between those two. So when I talk about feedback, which I just mentioned, it's a big part of the assessment cycle. So it's not just something that should happen, when you're just having conversations with kids, but also make sure there's opportunity for feedback in your assessment cycles, and it needs to be timely and appropriate. So if a student takes an assessment, or even turns in a project, or turns in an idea, or is writing on a discussion board in your LMS, and you wait maybe 2 weeks to reply and say, oh yeah, that was a good idea, or hey, what did you think about this? That's a little bit too long. So you need to make sure it's fairly timely, meaning respond within a day or two, especially when we're talking about synchronous or asynchronous online learning. Appropriate and reflective, but also honest and supportive. So be honest in your feedback. And here's another thing I'll add to that. Whenever you're giving any type of critical feedback, be sure that you are, if you can at all, try to do that in a verbal or a video format. It's really hard to hear inflection when someone is typing out a response. So if you say, man, you really need to work on this in words, that comes across a lot different than, man, you really need to work on this, but that's okay because here's a couple of ideas. Saying it to them is a little bit different than actually verbalizing it. So again, if you're going to be harsh on some of your critical feedback, make sure that you're trying to lend your own voice to it so they can actually hear inflection and tone. And it should, of course, be focused on that learning and enabling them. The end goal is to enable them and empowering them really to go back in and adjust or make adjustments based on what they've done right and what they've done wrong. And so kind of making those adjustments as they go on, that iterative cycle, if you will. So let's get into this first category, which is really synchronous assessment tools. So there's a lot of different ones out there. You probably, you're probably thinking in your head, this is probably the most common, by the way, like when you're doing your Zoom call with your class, or you're in your class in person, or maybe you're doing hybrid or high flex where you have students in both environments. Like, all right, we're all going to take this assessment at the same time. So there are some advantages to this type of assessment. Some of you well know this. You get that instant feedback right away. So if you're giving an assessment out, you can say quickly like, wow, the kids are really missing this concept, so I'm going to make an adjustment. And so you can then adjust your instruction based on that response. So you can see like, well, we've hit these two concepts well, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but most of the class missed this. And again, on a quick quiz, quick assessment, you can figure that out pretty quickly. You can provide that just-in-time support. So if you see students struggling right at that moment, you can jump in and say like, hey, here's something you need to reconsider or something you need to rethink. And again, generally, again, not always, but generally, this type of assessment focuses on, do you demonstrate what you know, demonstrating the knowledge of facts. So like, how much of this material do you actually know? That's the best use of synchronous assessment. And if it's done quickly, timely, and in where you have an environment where you can actually see all the kids, a little bit harder to cheat in that sense. I mean, a lot of the tools, and we'll mention them here in a second, a lot of them are time-based, so you have to answer like, do you know it or do you not? I mean, it doesn't give you time to go ask Alexa or do a Google search on it. So again, these are mostly focused on the left there, that assessment of learning, because we're looking at mostly how much do you understand or how much do you know? It's more of that kind of demonstration of achievement of what you've learned. That doesn't mean that's always the case. You could have a little bit of assessment for learning if you're giving them feedback along the way. If you're saying like, here's how you did, what do you think as a class? Or here's what you did, what do you think as a student? That's another part of that could work. So these are some common formative assessment tools. Some of you probably use these in your own classes. And these, again, what I love about these tools is they can be used in either environment, whether it be in person or students learning remotely. So in the case of like a quizzes or a Kahoot or a formative, those can be time-based. So again, you're not going to have as many of those students that are struggling with the idea that they're going to be able to go off and Google search some of these answers. When you think of Summative or Quizlet or even Google Forms, those can be a little bit longer form. They could potentially lend themselves to asynchronous, but again, it depends on what you're wanting your students to do. And then Albert.io, I mentioned there, it's more of a summative assessment tool, but it does have, what I like about Albert.io is it has lots of different ways that you can respond to questions. So it's not just multiple choice or fill in the blank. There's, you can drag your answer, you can draw your answer, you can select from a list, those kind of things. So I like that they have, I think, over 30 different types of ways you can answer questions. And they have a lot of good resources there too, but they're preloaded with a lot of things. Those of you high school teachers out there that are watching this, they're preloaded with a ton of content when it comes to high school content, especially AP content. So as we move on to this next type, we're still kind of staying in the synchronous realm, but when we think about assessment for learning, again, it's part of that process, part of that continual loop. So in this case, you could have used some of those tools for that, but that's more just like kind of a quick class assessment when you're talking about, here's a Kahoot, guys, I want to see how we're doing as a class, and the kids have fun. And then you as a teacher can say, wow, I know that we're missing this concept. But when you come to assessment for learning, there's some different types of tools. So for this one, we'll talk about interactive presentations, because I think they are really the magic sauce when it comes to how to do both in-person, hybrid, or remote learning, because you can do it in any or environment, and you have the added bonus of turning these into asynchronous if you decide. So it gives you the ability to do a little bit of both. So let's jump into one right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my student view here. And by the way, all these slides are actually on a Pear Deck, and I will share it with you at the end of this presentation. So don't feel like you have to take notes or anything like that. All these slides, you'll see it at the end. In fact, it may be even linked at the bottom of this, at the bottom of these notes. But here we are as a student. And what I'm going to do now is, of course, you can't see on the other side of my screen, but I'm actually going to be presenting with a teacher screen. So I'll show you a little bit about how this goes. But the idea is, again, going through these slides, and I'm going to skip ahead to some of the interactive ones. So I'm going to switch them ahead. And again, as a teacher, I'm able to kind of control the slides on one screen while the students are seeing. Right now, this is what's called a synchronous, or it's a teacher-led Pear Deck presentation. So again, different types of assessments here. If I wanted to push this one out and just say, how well do you know the material? I can have the student take this little dot and put it to the, well, not very well, or not too bad. This would be a great one to do with the whole class, because you can see quickly on your end, like, where are most of my students landing on this? How are they feeling about it? Where are their struggles? Where are maybe some things that I need to work on with that as well? And then we'll talk a little bit about kind of polling tools for feedback. So there's ways that you can do polls too. So again, Pear Deck, that was just one example of a quick checking for understanding. Of course, you could build in quizzes and all sorts of different things where you can actually see the kids give response. Open responses are amazing in Pear Deck too, because you can actually see certain ones and then actually highlight certain students and say like, "Ooh, I like what you said there. Can you go ahead and give me a little bit more information about that?" But for this next one, I thought it'd be interesting to show you another tool. So one of the things I like about Pear Deck is not only that it has all those interactive quizzing features, which are great for formative assessments, you can also build in links to other ed tech tools. So there's all these different polls for feedback. You can have Mentimeter, Go Soapbox, Plickr, Slido. My favorite that I tend to use mostly is Poll Everywhere. And so what I'm going to do now is something very different. And I'm going to show you this again from the student side. So I'm embedding Poll Everywhere right now, and it's embedded in this Pear Deck. So I'm going to go ahead and agree to everything here. And I have to choose what I prefer. So what I'm going to do is the students, what I would do with this case is, now you can do this with lots of other things. This is just demonstration. So I'm just picking 5 kind of random things in this sense. But what I want to have the kids do is tell me some things that they prefer. So this is a great strategy, by the way, just if you're trying to understand your students a little bit more, you want to get their interest. It's hard to do sometimes remotely because they're not always in the room. You don't get to hear those side conversations. So having things like this, little polls to kind of build in there to kind of figure out what their interests are, is an important thing to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the survey. And this is just a 5-question survey. So I'm just looking at what are some of your preferences. So Coke or Pepsi, okay. Now, those of you that are watching this, you're probably thinking in your head, you may agree with me or you may not, but that's going to come up in a minute. So as we're going through it, I want you to also think about what your preferences are in this as well. And again, doing this live with lots of students, it's great because you get all these different responses. And I'll show you what it looks like in the back end in just a second. Chocolate preference. Ooh, okay. Where are we falling on this one? I'm going to go with the white chocolate. I know most people probably like dark, but I'm going to go with white chocolate. Game preference. Oh, this is a hard one. Depends on the mood I'm in, I would say, between video games and board games. I'll say board games for now because I'm in that kind of mood, but normally it could be video games some other day. That's a 50-50. Type of social gathering you prefer. Now, pre-COVID, this may have been something completely different, to be honest, for most people, I'm sure. I will say that still for me, I prefer the big party, but I know a lot of people prefer the small gathering, a little more intimate there as well. And then our final question, and this is kind of one that a tricky question here. So again, which do you prefer? Which do you think is more important, honesty or other people's feelings? This is hard because honestly, you can, if you have honesty, you may be sacrificing other people's feelings. Like you can tell someone like, wow, you really don't look good in that outfit. You're hurting their feelings in some ways. But at the same time, if you care about their feelings, sometimes you have to be dishonest. You're like, that outfit looks really good on you, so you have to be careful about that. For me, I'm going to go with honesty. I think that's still more important. But again, be honest, literally with your response when you're thinking of these in your head. All right, so I'm going to finish that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my backend teacher view here. And so you can see just a sneak peek of kind of what I'm doing here. You can see that I've pushed this slide out to them, and I know that that's the slide they're on. Before this, I've loaded my slides into Google Slides, and I've added the Pear Deck add-on, and that's how I'm doing all of this now. So now I can go back in. Now this slideshow has basically become interactive. So earlier when I was presenting, I was showing you something at a Keynote, which is just a presentation tool like PowerPoint or Google Slides. But I uploaded that into Google Slides and then added the Pear Deck add-on. So I was able to add these little bits of functionality. So again, as students, you can either watch me do my presentation, or you can be an interactive part of it, which is what I like, again, about that formative feedback loop there. So let's go to our polls and see how we did. Now, I see that 80 students, in this case, because I've done this poll before with a large group of about 70 some odd teachers, actually. We did this survey just recently, and I see that 80 of them have completed the survey, and there's still someone down here at the very bottom that hasn't gotten it done. So what I like to do at this point is this. What I want to do is actually, before I show the answers, is I'm going to have them do a little something different. So I'm going to have them go in, and I want them to go into the chat. Or if you're in a room, you just have them write it down on a piece of paper maybe, or even share it with someone next to them. But what I want you to do is I want you to predict what the majority of the group picked for each of the categories. And then, so then what I would have them do is go into the chat and say like, okay, I think the majority picked Coke, dark, video, big, honesty. Or I think and so again, they're just picking the yellow words there. I think they picked Pepsi, white, video, small, feelings. Maybe it was something like that. And so everyone goes in, they go into the chat, and they list their 5 predictions. Now, again, not what you chose, but what you think the majority of the class chose. So it adds a little layer of empathy there. You're having to think about others, think about what the group thinks. It's also called a groupthink activity for that very reason. And so then what I do is right before I reveal the answers, I test the student's confidence level. And I say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to tell me what you think how many you think you got correct out of those 5, in terms of like you nailed it, you think you know exactly what your class thinks, that means you're 5 for 5. If you have no idea what your class is thinking or feeling, then maybe you're 0 or you're 1 for 5 or something like that. So it kind of turns into a little bit of a probability experiment too. So the students go in and so again, they've listed out their, Coke White video, small feelings or whatever, and then they list 4 out of 5, 3 out of 5, whatever it is. And then I go to the big reveal. And then this is usually when people are either surprised or not. So for the majority of people, when it comes to Coke or Pepsi, you're probably thinking to yourself, think out loud to yourself, which one do you think it'll be before I reveal? Ready? All right, you said it. Let's see what the answer is. I'm going to kind of hide it over here a little bit so you can't really see. Yeah, majority of the group. Now this is taken, just to let you know, this particular group of 80 some odd teachers were, it's a mix of K-12. So it was kind of all over the map. So it's not just elementary or high school, because that does make a difference on some of these, believe it or not. The next one was white chocolate or dark chocolate. What do you think? Okay, let's see if you're right. Dark chocolate wins out, and it usually does whenever I've done this. I don't think I've ever done this once where white chocolate won, which is interesting because that's the one I always pick. The next one was board games versus video games. What do you think that's going to be? Now, again, this is a group of teachers, K-12, who've been in quarantine for 7 months, so who knows? But let's see what it says. Wow, not even close. I thought it would be more 50-50, but in this case, this particular group of teachers, and I've only seen it maybe one time ever get close to 50-50. Most people always choose board games. That's just an interesting thing. The next one was, small gathering versus big party. Now, you know what I chose, because I showed you, I chose big party, but let's look and see what the group chose. And what's your prediction? Yeah, not even close. Everybody, and this could be, I don't know if this is COVID or that's just the way we're made up, but maybe we mostly prefer small gatherings. And again, taken with a group of teachers, so you never know. But I think most people, generally, whenever I've done this, I've never seen big party even get above like 15% on the threshold there. The last one was a tricky one. That one was honesty versus other people's feelings. So think about what your response is there. What would your response be? And then what do you think the majority of the people would respond? And then let's reveal the answer. Okay, in this particular group, we had honesty as the #1 response. I will tell you, I've done this before with different groups. I've did it with, I did it with a pre-K to 3rd grade group, teacher group once, and it was the majority was other people's feelings, which I thought was pretty interesting. So again, this is all just interesting ways to get feedback using polling tools for feedback. And I embedded it in this Pear Deck session so that I could actually push that out to the students. Why do I do that? And why do I not just give them the poll? I'll go back over to my student, go to my student responses here. And why do I not just give them a poll in the chat? You could totally do that, guys. I mean, I could send them to poll everywhere or pollev.blah, and then give them another link. But why not, if you already have them in an interactive tool like this, why not keep them in this tool as well? So a couple other ones that I'll mention as we kind of move along into the presentation is you can do this in lots of different ways. So why not have some form of gamified assessment too? So gamified assessment also allows you to give some sort of feedback. So again, we're still talking about the assessment for learning. So it's in that feedback loop cycle. And these are just a few examples here. You've got flippity.net, which we'll show you an example of in just a second. We've also got Breakout EDU, which is a great tool that they now have a ton of free digital content when it comes to digital breakout rooms, which I really enjoy. And then there is CrowdPer, which you may not have heard of. And it's kind of similar to, I would say, it's a trivia game. It's one I use whenever I do host trivia nights. It is intensely enjoyable. It does give you lots of extra controls that maybe the typical quizzing games don't let you have in terms of revealing answers and taking different fill-in answers, like type-in answers. So it does gamify the assessment. And of course, it's in a trivia game format. So you could have teams, you can have them as virtual teams or physical teams, and you can actually spit out the answers that way. And it gives you a ranking and leaderboard. It's a fun, different platform. So I put it under gamified. Now, I will tell you one word of caution, CrowdPer is only free for up to 20 users. So you have to be kind of careful about that if you have a bigger class. I've asked them about upping it to 30, but they haven't yet. So if you want it for a lot of students, you have to pay for kind of a bigger one, but there's a lot of great stuff. And it comes with some pre-built, just kind of trivia questions. But of course, you can add any of your own. You can add GIFs, videos, memes, everything. So it's pretty fun. So I list that in here for that reason right there. So let's get into one. Let's do flippity.net. So before we do this, I'm going to show you just kind of the front end of this. So this is flippity.net bingo. And I'm going to show you the back end of how I even got to this. So I'm going to switch back over to my teacher view here. And you can see there's my polls again. I just pushed them. So on my side, all I see is this, but of course the student actually got the link because I had a short link that I added, an actual Flippity link that I put in there to push out to them. And Flippity.net, for those of you that haven't used it, has a ton of free resources. Now, a few caveats here. One is you have to use Google spreadsheets, Google Sheets, in order to actually use Flippity.net. So if you're a non-Google district, I know teachers that have used their private Gmail accounts for this. I do know a couple of districts sometimes will block it because it does have these ads. The ads are never inappropriate or anything, but there are ads and some districts choose to block that. There are ways to actually block that as well, block just the ad to come through. But again, free platform, so we can't argue with that as long as your district allows you to use it. I'm going to show you just a couple of examples, and I'll show you the bingo one too. So these are all, again, different ideas. There's the bingo right there. What you can do with all of these is you can edit any of them. So like, let's say the game show one is one of my favorites. So I'll just show you a quick demo of what that looks like. So I'm going to click on demo. It's going to pump up a little demo here. All right, there we go. And now it's loaded. And we see that there are all these different interactive game shows. You can add teams on this if you want to. Let me make sure. I think you might be able to hear the audio sound, but I want to make sure you can hear it. So we can add teams. We can change the team names to, whoever, Bob, team, 11, team, Pear. Anyway, you get the idea. And what they can do is they can go in and choose questions. So you can do this a couple different ways. The way I've seen it done mostly is teacher puts this up on the screen in their classroom or up on the screen on Zoom or in their video call. And then the students can kind of select via chat or via unmuting their mics and figure out who the team leader is. It's going to be asking which questions, like, okay, we'll take the Simpsons for 200. And so you read it and it says, what's the name of a Pooh's convenience store? The teams all put in their guesses. And they can do this a couple different ways too. They can write it down. A lot of times I've seen teachers do it where they write it down on a whiteboard and hold up their guess. Just that way that you're not seeing everyone's answers in the chat. You could have it to where they have to type it in the chat. The trick with that is, of course, you can see other kids' answers. The best way I've seen it done is a teacher said, just privately message me. So you have one person that's in the group that selects who it is, and they have to privately message it. So this is a great way for kids to figure out how to also communicate in Zoom chats and group chats, because they're able to, if they can direct message each other, that's awesome. If they can't, it becomes a little harder because then you're giving away the answer. So let's say that like the answer is Quickie Mart, 11 got it right, Pear didn't. There we go, Bob, team 6. Okay, so we're gonna move along. And you can see their scores are automatically tabulated. You don't have to have all these. By the way, this is all customizable. So let's go check out the back end of this. So I'm gonna back out. I'm gonna go back over to flippity.net right now, and I'm gonna go to the template. So you'll notice on all of these that there's a demo, there's instructions, and then there's template. So I'm gonna click on template, make a copy, and this is where it puts it into Google Sheets. And again, this takes a minute, so it may take a few seconds to load. It's not the fastest thing. You can see it says waiting for Google Docs. There we go, didn't take too long. And here are, again, the categories, all the questions. So the only thing you don't want to do, you can change the titles of any of these. You can even change some of the question amounts. I usually leave the blue and just kind of naturally the way they are because it comes up perfectly. But if I wanted to change this to, some question about something, and then the answer is, I don't know, answer this, I don't know. Doesn't make any sense, but you get the idea. I can change these. I can edit all of these now. And now the great thing is I can then share this link back out to my students, not this back end link, mind you, but where it says right here, get the link here. I can click on that and you see this link. That's the link that I can push out to my students. And now you know why I also chose to use Pear Deck, because I was able to take this link and just drop it into Pear Deck. It's a very long, ugly link. And if I wanted to, I could send this out to students in a chat too, and they could copy paste it. I could post it on an LMS and they could copy paste it. There's lots of different ways you can get it out to them. I just like the idea of keeping them in the one tool. But before you do that, there's something extremely important that you have to remember that I messed up the first 2 or 3 times I did this. And I thought, man, why is this not working? It's because it says it right here in red. It says, don't forget to publish your spreadsheet first. And so what you have to do is file, go to publish to web, and then you want to publish the entire document. what it's going to do is it's going to publish the front end of this. So it's able to, Flippity is able to connect with your spreadsheet and then basically spit out that front end of what that trivia game looks like. So I'm going to hit publish. It's going to give you a warning, like, are you sure you want to publish this? Yes. The worst thing that can happen is some kid's going to end up taking my trivia game and learn something about The Simpsons. Who knows? So there we go. There's that link again. I'm just going to take this link here now, and I'm going to go over to another tab and click on it. There we see my categories. Everything looks the same, right? But when I click on this question now, notice that it says some question about something. Now I can click on it and it says answer this. So what's great about this is now if I wanted to, now that it's published, I could go in and change this to question number 2, and this could be answer, number 2. And then I go back over here to my quiz and update it, and look, the same link, by the way, I didn't have to send out a new link. There's that one again, that's still there, but here, look at that. Oh, there's question number 2, answer number 2. So once you've got it published, you can really just edit all of this stuff, and then just kind of, the kids can stay on that same link. So let me go back and just show you the bingo part of this too, because I think bingo is a fun one as well. So with bingo, the demo for bingo here is you have kind of all these states listed. And then you're, as a teacher, giving them the capitals. So thinking about different ways you can do this, they give you a QR code here. I'm just going to go to the actual bingo card, and you can see here, it is an interactive bingo card. And so if I wanted a new board, I could choose the different things. So this is a great kind of team-wise review, but also great for individual student review whenever you're doing some sort of gamified assessment. But again, like anything else, let me go back out. And if I go to the template, I make a copy. And now, again, give it a few seconds, kind of work its little magic there. What it's going to do now is it's going to spit it into a Google spreadsheet. Now, the alt terms are things that you would read is like, okay, I'm going to say this word, but the answers are the actual terms. You don't have to have alt terms. You can actually delete this column if you want. But then you can actually change this to whatever. So think about if you're doing, if you're teaching foreign language or world languages, you could actually have terms that are in a foreign language. You could say them in English and they have to convert them, or vice versa. If you're doing math facts, you can actually put in the answers here. So if you could actually say, okay, I want you guys to do this math question, and they have to write it all out and figure out the answer, and then they have to see if they actually have the answer on their bingo board. So again, it kind of lends itself to any strategy, and it was what I like about it. And again, blending it with the Pear Deck, it does let you kind of have that idea of like, let's have the students actually go in, and they don't have to go out and go to some other different thing. They can just do it right here inside Pear Deck itself. So I'll show you again on the Pear Deck side of things as a student view. This bingo board's a little bit tricky because it's kind of filled up a little bit, so they may have to scroll a little bit depending on the side of the screen, or they could resize their screen. I gave them a free space. This one I did music bingo once, so what I did is I would play a song, and if they heard the song, they would actually know the artist. They would click on it, and the idea again is to get a bingo of some sort. One last bit of word of advice if you're doing bingo, I would keep the terms to about 50. In other words, don't put too many. With the music bingo one, I did like 75 different songs, which I thought would be great, but it took forever. So if you have too many, then there's too many different boards out there. So better to give it less. Like I would probably say between 40 and 50 terms versus let's say 75 or 100, because it'll take you forever to play the bingo game. So let's allow pivot a little bit. So you've seen a little bit of how we can embed some of that into Pear Deck, but let's pivot a little bit to asynchronous assessment. So everything I've done up to this point is done in a synchronous environment. So, sending out the quizzes, doing the bingo games, playing the game show stuff, all of that is done while you're learning all at the same time. So in other words, all the kids are on the call at the same time, or they're in the classroom at the same time. Now we're going to pivot to asynchronous assessment tools and strategies. And there are a lot of pros of this as well, just like there are with synchronous. So some of the pros would be that now you have flexible time. Remember, the student that wants to get stuff done early versus the student that wants to finish things at the end. A lot of time to complete the process. It's not as internet dependent. And I mention that because not all of our students have access to this high-speed broadband internet. So if you're doing something like a synchronous assessment where they all have to be on Zoom at the same time, but then also answering this question at the same time, and if their internet drops out and all of a sudden they've lost their assessment, that could really damage a kid. So having ideas and examples of asynchronous is great for that, because say, okay, I want you to work on this project, and maybe it is on the internet, but it's a project that auto saves, or it's a Google slideshow, or it's a Canva, or it's something that they're building that they can do it over time. And if their internet is a little laggy, they can say, you know what, I'm going to take a pause and work on this in a minute. They don't have to be on it all the time. There's time, generally, there's time built in for reflection, which you don't have as much in synchronous. When we're going through a synchronous assessment, unlike, except for maybe the poll one that I did with you guys earlier, usually it's just go, 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 here's the answers. And I kind of self-reflect. I don't really have time for that. I'm just going to move on to the next thing, versus asynchronous where you have time for that. I also like that you can have collaboration in asynchronous. You could a little bit in synchronous, like the game show one I just shared with you. It's admittedly very tricky. If you've ever done Quizlet Live, you know that kids can kind of break up into teams and do collaborative assessment, which is awesome, but that's really well done in person. It's hard to do that remotely. And then more focused on the process and demonstrating understanding. So whereas the synchronous assessment was more about demonstrating knowledge, this is more about demonstrating, again, that understanding, that process. And group work, there's some ideas around this as well. So, you know, making sure that you're assessing the performance of the group, not just its individuals. Use the timestamps. It's a great thing about having technologies. You can actually see who's actually going in and editing the document or doing the work in a lot of cases. Giving that regular feedback, and also give the students always, I think this is always important, even in synchronous assessment, give them an opportunity to evaluate themselves. And then one thing that I didn't do until later in my teaching career that I found extremely valuable was giving the students an opportunity to actually do peer evaluations, and then that could affect grade. So having students look at someone else through a critical lens can actually affect their own learning as well, which is it was an important thing. Because like, wow, I never thought about that strategy, and maybe that could help me too down the road. So giving them a chance to do some peer evaluation is important. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but make sure you're focusing on that timely, appropriate, and honest feedback. So as we mentioned in the last category, we talked a little bit about assessment of and for. We're going to go back into assessment for learning when it comes to asynchronous now. And so this is part of that student feedback loop. And this can be done via LMS. So a lot of you maybe have one of these LMSs, a Google Classroom or Canvas or Seesaw out there, is a way to give that student feedback. So again, the idea is it's asynchronous, student submits work, and then you come in at a later time, timely, hopefully, and you're giving them some sort of feedback and creating that kind of feedback cycle based on how they did. So you're assessing how they did and giving them some feedback, and then maybe they're adjusting as they go along. There's also an added component of doing, instead of doing it just in an LMS, you could bring it over into something like Flipgrid. And Flipgrid, guess what? Again, it can be embedded into a Pear Deck, so you don't feel like the kids have to go to some different code every time. You can have that embedded, or send them to a Flipgrid and have them answer a question about what are their thoughts around something. Give us your understanding about this concept. This makes it so much harder, again, to cheat, because you really get to hear their voice and feedback into what they think about a concept. And there are now tools in Flipgrid that if a student, let's say, is uncomfortable turning their video camera on, they can actually just have a whiteboard up, or they could have like a little emoji or a photo or something up on the screen, but you're still able to hear their voice and they're able to hear your voice. You remember earlier when I mentioned make sure when you're giving honest feedback that you're using your voice. This is a great tool to do that. Also, if you want to, you can turn on the student to student interaction part, where students can actually give each other's their own voice and say like, okay, now each kid can go in and actually evaluate each other, teaching them those early digital literacy skills, which I think is important about how to be good digital citizens and how to give feedback online. I think that's an important part of it. Let's get to this last one. And this one, again, all three of these have a place in the classroom. I would say that, you know, when it comes to assessment of learning, I use that a lot for like my benchmarks. I want to see like, how are my students doing at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, the end of the year. Assessment for learning, I'm doing more daily, kind of the daily check-ins with the students in real time. The assessment as learning is more of a longer project-based type idea. So they're really working, assessing themselves. They're trying to create, maybe there's a rubric that's helping guide them, but for the most part, they're doing a lot of this on their own. They're empowered through their continuous process. And then as a teacher, the trick is, how do you get insight into what they're doing when you're not standing over them in a classroom, right? So you need a way of documenting that. There's a lot of different tools out there, and some LMSs give you some portfolio tools. That's a great way to do it. One that I've found particularly useful in my line of work when it comes to teaching students and also teachers is a tool called Bulb. And what it does is, it's a free tool. I think there's a paid version to get extra bells and whistles, but for the most part, the free tool gives you everything, but it's just limited in how many like little portfolios you can have. But again, voice feedback and process is a big part of this. And I think what I like about this tool is it gives you not only the voice and the feedback, but also gives you insight into process. So here's an example. Here we have a student. This is Gabe. He's a fourth grader up in Fort Collins. And what he's doing is he's got his little category set up there. So here's math. And you can see that he's been using this for a couple of years because he's actually got fifth, third grade math and fourth grade math. And he's able to take pictures, analog, it doesn't have to all be digital, even just record a little video of himself doing the work to show that he can demonstrate what he's doing so you can actually hear him. And then this almost turns into a blog in some ways, because now it's like he's documenting his process. He's talking about like one of his best grades he ever got was on this PDF. And so when he also can go in and do this, you can actually go back a little bit. So he's going to go back now. And you can also use this for goal setting, which I think is important too. So you can say, okay, I'm going to set some goals for this year. My fourth grade goals and reflections. This is a great thing to do at the beginning of the year and see how they do. His is, to stop using so much screen time. So he's getting different ideas and strategies. Again, the idea is empowering him. So he's playing more board games. He's doing different things. So the idea is giving them the opportunity to have a space to actually demonstrate their process and understanding. If you are a PE or athletics teacher out there, this is a great tool for you, because what it can do is a student can go to like, okay, I'm going to show you how I do, let's say, a push-up on day one, and then kind of continue to demonstrate that form and document how they're doing it. Is their form increasing? Are they able to do more? Why are they able to do more? Maybe it's a swing or a way to throw to shoot a basketball or something like that, where they actually take pictures and videos of them doing it and then reflect again on that process, which is where all that learning is internalized. So as we wrap up here and we get to this kind of final checklist of remote assessment, we went through a lot of different tools and strategies, and hopefully you'll have a chance to kind of look over them yourselves. And again, I'll share this Pear Deck slide with you, which has all of this information on it. But I always like to go through this final checklist. Whenever I'm doing assessments, I think to myself, am I going to do this in a synchronous or asynchronous environment? Those make a big difference. You notice as we went through them, there's a big difference between giving synchronous and asynchronous, what kind of assessment you're going to need to give. Am I checking for their understanding, like how well they know or feel or opine about a subject, let's say? Or is it more about how much I want them to know about the facts? Like, do you know the facts? Do you know the material? Because those are different types of assessment as well. Is there opportunity for students to reflect on the process? Is that ever built in at all? There are times in assessments where you don't have that. You're just doing a quick temperature check. Those assessments for learning. I'm just going to check in quickly on a formative assessment here. Okay, we're not doing great on this, so we're going to move along. You as a teacher are doing most of the reflection, but there are opportunities too where you can give them that time to reflect. And then also, I think the most important part, and this is really hard to do in a synchronous formative environment when you're just giving quick little assessments, but try to give them some opportunity at some point throughout the school year to give you an explanation of what they're thinking and how are they able to document that. That could be in a Google Doc, it could be in a bulb portfolio, it can be in a discussion thread on an LMS, but thinking about ways for them to actually demonstrate that their process and thinking. And I think Flipgrid will work great for that too, because you can record it as well, or using the built-in tools that Pear Deck provides when it comes to those polling and those kind of questions like, what do you think about this? Those are great ways, again, to kind of document what a student is thinking. So a couple of quick things as we wrap up here. And this I mentioned at the very beginning of this session that I have promoted. I've now done this course called the Remote Learning Coach, and hopefully you guys get a chance to check it out. This section, actually, I have a whole module 6 is all based on assessing students remotely. So you got some snippets of it, but there's a lot more information in the course if you're interested. And by the way, if you are interested, you can use the code PAIR2020 for 20% off. So again, that's the Remote Learning Coach. You can get that for 20% off. Look up the Remote Learning Coach, my name. You can actually, I'll put a little link here on the video, mrhook.it/RLC for Remote Learning Coach. And if you go to that link, you can actually see it and get 20% off using PAIR2020 as the coupon code there. Hope you guys enjoy that. That's it. That's strategies for assessing students remotely. You can see there also, there's a short link, mrhook.it/pair. That will take you to the Pear Deck version of this presentation that is student-paced. It does have built in all of those polls and the bingo and all the other fun stuff. So check that out when you get a chance. Thank you guys so much. I hope you enjoy it. You can find me at Mr. Hooker on Twitter, or you can reach out to me on email, carl@hookertech.com, or check out my website, carlhooker.com. Thank you guys so much, and I hope you enjoy the Pear Fair.